Hello and welcome to the State of Events, where event professionals connect. Welcome to session 2 of Normalizing Mental Health, Breaking Stigma. I'm so excited to have this panel here today to speak on this topic. I think we have a well-rounded presentation today to address taboo conversations about mental health and the different areas in which that taboo might still be present. And we're going to break some of that and generate dialogue on how to actually bring healthy mental health conversations into dialogues and spaces that might have otherwise seemed taboo. So I'm Sonia Alcazar Collier. I'm the host of the State of Events podcast and online community for the events industry. I'm so thankful that we are entrusted to be more of a resource to the event industry and obviously the professionals that are a part of it by way of addressing them from a holistic approach. That's what TISO is all about. It's providing a holistic approach to resourcing you as whether that be an entrepreneur, a small business, a service provider in the event industry ecosystem. And so I have two amazing people from the team, Cara and Karen, that I'm going to toss to in a second. I do want to say one thing before we get started, just to kind of get this out of the way from, like a legal standpoint. So the State of Events and its members are not medical doctors. We are just providing a space to create dialogue around mental health awareness. Most of our panelists are either from the medical field, an executive leadership role, or in some cases even certified in their industry. And they have gone through the necessary steps to be able to communicate from an expert level, even if that's by way of volunteering their time in certain sectors that address mental health. But TISO does not represent any medical board, and we are not associated with any members of any medical associations. So now that we got that out of the way, ready to get some fun started, I'm going to toss to Cara. Can you please tell everyone who you are and what you're going to be doing today?
Yes, I'm Cara. I am part of the TISO team, and I will be co-hosting with Sonia today. And also, this is a safe space for everyone to gain resources and be vulnerable in a protected environment. So please refrain from diagnosing or giving your opinion to others in the chat. You are free to offer support and empathize, but leave therapeutic advising to our panelists. Now I'll toss to Karen, our chat moderator.
Hey, good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you may be at. Super excited to be here. I'm going to be your fun, happy chat moderator. So please engage the chat with the chat. We're going to have some fun today, be really uplifting. Put any question you may have in the chat. There's no question too big, no question too small. Our panelists are excited to engage with you today. Also, as well, if we don't get to your question, it isn't that we don't love you. It's just that for some reason, the time has run long. So please, again, engage with the chat, and we're really excited you're here.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to jump right in and start introducing our panel. So from the great state of Virginia, we have Coach Mark James, and he is from the Urban Trauma Healing Institute, actually founder of that. He's an experienced educational warrior that speaks truth to power. Coach Mark James is a vivacious servant leader. He has extensive experience in student engagement, achievement, discovery, and behavioral learning. Welcome, Coach.
Thank you for having me today.
Happy to have you. We also have Kimme Lewis and Rhea Fluker from Stretch for Women. Kimme Lewis is an entrepreneur, a scholar, and an advocate for women's emotional healing. And Rhea Fluker, passionate about women and emotional healing, are the founders and directors of Stretch for Women Incorporated. Stretch is focused on facilitating spaces for women to be vulnerable. Thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited.
Ditto.
Love it. Also, just a little shout out from my alma mater, the New School. Rhea is a fellow New Schooler. So what's up to any of the New School community that might be participating here? And then last but not least, we have Megan Eddinger from Workplaceless. Workplaceless helps remote workers, managers, and companies thrive in location-free and flexible environments. Most of the community that belongs to Workplaceless is remote or has been in a remote environment for work. I thank you personally, Megan, for being a resource to someone like me who's been remote since before remote was cool.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy to have you. All right. Well, let's just jump right in here with our discussion. Coach, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, the work that you do, and a little bit about how you got into working in the space that you work?
Sure, absolutely. I think I'll start with my background. I started working in schools, the public school system as a reading teacher, and then moved up to an administrator. And then eventually I became a college football coach and then a head football coach at a college. In the space that I'm working in, I feel like I've always worked in this space. I've never had the opportunity to work outside of working with youth. And I'm very appreciative for that and blessed to be able to have that opportunity. In Richmond, Central Virginia, and specifically, we work directly within our urban communities, what we call the Big Six, where there is a lot of high crime, a lot of violence, a lot of poverty. And we work in there to be able to emancipate our communities and help support them so that they could be successful and our children could have successful and safe lives. So that's what we practice. That's what we do. That's our methodology, and that's what we bring forth.
Awesome. Thank you for the work that you do in our communities. Kimme and Rhea, whichever of you would like to go first, please tell us a little bit about Stretch.
Yeah, about me or about Stretch? Okay, great.
Both.
Yes. So I hail from the great state of Texas, born and raised in Texas, went to school at the University of Texas at Austin, hook 'em horns. I got my bachelor's degree in African and African diaspora studies, which is just a fancy word for Black studies. And then I moved shortly after working through corporate America. I moved to LA, where I found community in church and friends. And I, through this community, was able to find my calling to Stretch. I was going through a program where it's focused on spiritual growth and our mental health and the intersection of our faith and our mental health. And that's kind of where I was introduced to this idea of mental health being in the church. And I have a huge passion for women. And I felt like God just asked me to create a space for women to just be who they are in truth. I think a lot of times it's difficult for us to embrace the harsh realities about ourselves because of all the things that will come up, and I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But that's what Stretch does. We just provide a space for women to come and share and be real in where they are. And our main thing is that we pay for therapy for women. So that's our main focus, and we're so excited about that. So that's about Stretch.
Yeah, and I'm co-director of Stretch. And personally, I too hail from the great state of Texas and went to the University of Texas at Austin, hook 'em horns. Got to always put that on there. I got my bachelor's in communications with a minor in Afro-diaspora studies. And then I got my master's from the New School. Go New School. And for me, my journey with mental, emotional, and spiritual health began when I moved to California 4 years ago. And through Stretch, I've gone on my own personal journey in my emotional healing. And I see the intersectionality between emotional health, spiritual, and mental health. And so now to be in a position helping to run an organization that helps create that space for other women to go along that journey is something that means a lot to me. And I'm very passionate about. I've always been connected to women, but to be able to not only experience it myself, but to be walking alongside women to also experience that growth and go on that journey is something that's so rewarding. So like Kimme said, Stretch, we provide therapy and other services along with community support because it's just not often that you find spaces for women to be able to sit in where they are. A lot of times spaces are curated for fixing and helping and advising, but it's not often that you can create a space for you to be where you're at and be accepted in that space. And in our experience, that's where true healing comes, when you're able to just be where you're at and not feel shame about the journey you've been on and what you're going through currently. So.
Give it up for Pastor Rhea. Yes, I love this. And I love how our journeys that we think are for a service for someone else that we feel called to steward. I love how that also lands up blessing us and actually healing our own lives, right? what better story than to go through something in which you're changed as well. I love that. I love when the road leads like that. And lastly, Megan from Workplaceless, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Workplaceless.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am first and foremost a remote work advocate. So I feel very strongly and very passionately about making remote and flexible work available to especially parents and caregivers, but really for anyone who wants access to it. And through that, I have been connected with Workplaceless for just over 2 years now. And through the pandemic, one of our most popular resources that we provide is a workshop where we help remote and hybrid teams work through feelings of isolation and burnout. So giving them preventative measures that they can take, and then also helping them identify these things in themselves, as well as with the people that they work with, and creating safe spaces for those conversations, which is really important.
I love how you said a remote worker advocate. That is so huge, right? We find ourselves in a really interesting category where we don't have an HR. We really have to advocate for ourselves, and so it's reassuring for me anyway to know that there are people who actually believe that they're called to advocate for us. I appreciate the work that you do. All right. I wanted to ask this question sort of to everyone from your particular perspectives on this concept of mental health. Coach, I'd like to start with you. What are some perspectives towards mental health that you feel and that you've even experienced are systemic in American culture?
Well, I think that's a great question to start this off. And I think Rhea did a great job, and I'm going to steal a word that she just said, station. We are taught through social media, through media period, and just in general life and socialization, that your station is unworthy. And when you couple that with the isms and schisms of what society deems, whether, especially if you're a person of color in this country, you then start behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And those things build up what I call vicarious trauma, which in my line of work, I define vicarious trauma as the urban stains that are set upon us that we ignore because they're unpopular. We ignore because nobody wants to see them, and we get placed in silos. And in those silos, many mental stains or urban stains remain unaddressed until certain things happen in life to you or around you that is need for it to be addressed. And a lot of times it's unfortunate that it's crimes committed that then people say, oh, well, he had or she had a mental problem. But it's because our station is unpopular, and the station that we're on does not meet what society says and deems is necessary to be considered successful. The last thing I would say to that is Bob Marley sings a song that says, 2 songs I'll combine in, Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery, that's the first part. But then he also sings a song that speaks about you're running and you're running and you're running away. You're running away, but you're running away from yourself. You can't run away from who you are. God uniquely created you, or whatever your faith believes in, uniquely created and designed you in a magnificent way. And when people start understanding that who they are is a unique tool in the world, and to ignore what society deems as normal or regular or successful, that's when we'll be able to start alleviating some of these urban stains that affect us in our communities.
Coach, it never fails. Every time I'm on the phone with you or interview you, you always coin a phrase. And today we have the urban stains is officially a hashtag for this conversation. I appreciate that. I appreciate that perspective as well. And from your perspective, Kimme and Rhea, what are some mental health issues that you feel are systemic, in whether it be American culture or just different cultural groups?
Yeah, I'll go first, and then I'm sure Rhea will follow. But I agree with everything Coach Mark James said. Wow. I was even thinking about this from a relationship perspective. And when I say relationship, I mean friendships, romantic, any type of relationship. I think what he said was true. We don't really talk about mental health issues until they become what we deem as extreme or severe. And I think it really starts in the simple conversations. I think we're not very open to experiencing other people have weak moments. We're not really open to experiencing other people go through trauma and be triggered by trauma. I think we lack an understanding of what it means to be triggered. I think we lack understanding of how our trauma plays out into our day-to-day lives and how we interact with other people. And I think that has caused us to have like this lack of patience with one another in our mental health, because mental health is not just when we get to that breaking point. It's an everyday decision and an everyday lifestyle that we have to make. And I think when we have people who are more open to, hey, like, oh, you're triggered. Okay, let's work with this. But instead, we have a cancel culture. So anytime I experience your brokenness, anytime I experience your trauma, I'm done with you. And I think that is something that is systemic and has to change. Healing comes through relationship. Whether you have a relationship with God, a relationship with friends, healing comes through relationship. And if we lack the ability to stand and sit with people in hard moments, and I think we say that like, I'll be with you through thick and thin, but not recognizing that thick and thin is when I'm triggered because something that happened to me in my childhood, you're doing something that reminds me of that. My body is having a response. I can't really control that until I go to therapy and work through that and actually have you hold me in a space where that's okay for me to feel that and not have to fear abandonment. That's my opinion on that. But I think that's something that definitely we have to address.
So well said. It's literally so well said, Kimme. And so much of the cancel culture, like it is a societal expectation placed on people that then bleeds into these relationships. So what Kimme was saying, it's so easy for us to say this is a toxic relationship or this is a toxic friendship without actually knowing what that means. Because things are uncomfortable or hard, it doesn't make them toxic. Something that within our community, someone said that I'm going to carry is that toxicity, true toxicity is when something that someone does or says makes you see yourself differently than how God built you. So if there are actions that are happening from someone else that is making me question my identity, that is making me believe that I am not worthy of the things that I am worthy of and different than how God has created me to be, then that is toxic. But if there's someone that's going through something that's uncomfortable, that I don't like, that in and of itself isn't toxic. And so when we start having an ability, again, just what Kimme said, to build intimate relationships, not just surface relationships, but relationships with people that won't leave in hard moments that you can process through, whether it's family, whether it's friends, or whether it's with God, then those are the moments where you can actually go start a healing journey. Because we even talk about creating spaces for healing to happen. If we listen to society, we don't really want to ever start a healing journey. Society says, show up as the person you want to be perceived. And so there's no real authentic transformation happening because we're so busy trying to look as though we're okay and to put on a facade that we're fine, when in actuality, that's not the truth of what's going on. And true healing can't happen if we're living in a fake land, if we're living in rainbows and butterflies and not honestly addressing the truth of where we're at. Healing can never take place. That journey can never begin.
Wow. And we just got started. That's how we do around here. We go right in. As I'm listening to these responses, I'm also thinking that for your line of work, Megan, you get the privilege, whether you may see it as a privilege or not, you get the privilege of supporting people who are all across the map, right? Culturally, regionally, whateverly. So I'm sure your experience is quite vast with that. How do you view America and these systemic mental health issues?
Yeah, when it comes to work, I think there are two really important factors that really contribute to our mental health and the status of it and how we talk about it, right? And one touches on something that Rhea just said, which is this ability to bring our full selves to work. I think a lot of people are afraid to do that because they're afraid of being viewed as not being professional, right? So we come to work and we have to like push everything else aside in order to be this professional version of ourselves so that we can get paid and, get promoted and all of those things. So we don't always feel comfortable coming into a meeting or starting our day by saying, I'm anxious today. I'm showing up in a different way today than maybe you are. And that's that's where I'm at right now. And like, just letting your team know. And then the second contributing factor, I think, is this hustle culture. We are always connected to our phones and to our communication channels. And we don't get that time to rest anymore. There is no separation between work and home. People have access to you at all times. And unless you create and stand firm on your boundaries, you will burn out. You will burn out really quickly. So those, I think, are the top two systemic factors that happen in the workplace.
I think that word alone is so empowering. I'm burnt out. And that can mean, because that kind of covers, oh, you could be anxious, you could be frustrated, you could have a lot. It really is this great go-to word that kind of just, we always say to each other, how are you today? Oh, I'm good. How are you? We're so quick to get to how are you doing instead of being like, I'm burned out today. How are you? Thinking it's going to elicit some kind of response. I almost think it should be okay to sort of wear whatever letter you have that day and say, hi, how are you? Last night was crappy, but how are you? I wonder what kind of conversations we'd get to if we started them off like that.
Work was the thing that paired with that experience that sort of led me to like my deep end. In my experience in a corporate environment, I worked for name brand places where that was the culture. You could not say that. Like, people would look at you crazy and you'd be replaced. But that was those two things in tandem between my childhood and how I was raised and that work environment sent me to my breaking point. And so the work that you do, like, for me in my life, if I could have experienced that 10 years ago, who knows where I would be now. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you do, because for me, it just really ingrained in me that this isn't just a home. This society says that this isn't okay, literally anywhere. You can't experience this. And so work being the place that you're at most outside of your home, being a place that is perpetuating this lie that you can't be your full self, is why I'm now working to be my full self in all these environments. So it ended up working out, but I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you do. I think that's just so important.
I think that's a good segue to kind of address leadership, address sort of these key leader relationships that we find. Coach, I'd like to kind of start this off with, from your perspective, working with leaders, working with clients who are seeking to get, support as they lead others. What have you seen key leaders, why are key leaders sometimes in fear of addressing mental health in the workplace? And then also too, I just kind of, as everyone's kind of thinking about their answers, there's the workplace, there's circles of faith, there's in our communities. Why isn't this from the top down as prominent as we'd like to see it?
I think that how I'll answer that is, I'll start out with one word: capitalism. In this country, capitalism is based on production. And production, or the lack of production, equates to weakness. So when you really look at a lot of leaders, and I do training for leaders, but when you look at a lot of leaders, especially in corporate America, production and success supersedes the care of those that come together and work to create that success. So it's unfortunate, but it's a part of realism that you have to address, that in this country, capitalism rules. And if you were to ask me what are the best practices, I would say the best leaders are ones that lead from the bottom up. The best leaders lead. I worked with somebody that was a CEO, and I walked into his organization and he saw a piece of paper on the ground and he picked it up. And at that point, what was instilled in my thought was, if you're leading and those who you lead you care not about, when you look around, there'll be nobody behind you. You're leading with your title and not with a leadership spirit. I'll say, if you look at servant leadership, it's at the core of what leaders should be. You should be able to lead without words. And the way that you lead without words is one, here it is, love. You can't say that you care about somebody that's working for you and you don't love them. And in order to love somebody, you've got to embrace agape love. And agape love says, listen, I love you if you're sick. I love you if you're down. I love you if you're less productive, but I love you anyway. Without that love, many leaders are unsuccessful, and it's unfortunate.
Megan, do you have anything to say about that? Because I wonder, in working with people who are seeking Workplaceless to sort of support that effort, what Coach described is almost sort of innate to us within family, right? Or a family that you have built or that you have worked hard on creating, even if they're not blood relatives. But I feel like he described what we, in theory, automatically give to our family members. Why is there a shift at work from key leaders that now they're not viewing or maybe they are, but maybe they're not viewing their team as their family? Because I feel like if you kind of had the regard for them, depending, of course, about how you feel about family, what your views are about family. But if you do lead with like, my family is so important to me, why do we then shift when it comes to our work environment as to say, I don't necessarily have to hold you in the kind of regard as I would my family member?
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes right back to what Coach led with, which is productivity, right? You are here to work, you're here to get a job done. And so that's kind of where the relationship ends a lot of times. The trust and the relationship is very transactional and very task-based. So to go the extra step and to get to know your employees or your team as the people that they are outside of work is a step that a lot of people are uncomfortable with for lots of reasons, right? Because there's that whole, you can't be too friendly with the people who, report up to you and those kinds of things. But there are ways that you can get to know people and even just their mannerisms, right? If I'm showing up and all of a sudden my camera is not on, or I'm showing up later to meetings than I normally do, or my, my projects are not as complete as they normally were, those are warning signs. And instead of addressing them right away as performance issues, you can check in with the person and say, are you okay? Is there something going on? How can I support you? Whereas I think we're so quick right now, or always really, to just go straight to performance. It automatically becomes a performance issue. It then becomes an HR concern. So again, bringing your whole self to work and getting to know the people as people is so critical here.
And if I already have issues with performance from wherever they stem from, then this is really all going to be bad for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. Wow. Ladies of Stretch, I know you cross paths with so many different walks of life of people. Kimme's already ready. Let me get into this. Why are key leaders in fear of addressing mental health?
Yeah, Coach, you got bars because what he said was capitalism, and that stuck out to me. And then he said productivity, and I'm like, yep. And me and Rhea, we work in the healing space, so it's sad that productivity in the healing space is the goal. We are not wanting to sit with people for a long period of time as they go through their process. We want to see quick healing results. Why are you still doing XYZ? Why do you still have this thing? Haven't you gone to church? Haven't you done the work? Why is it still this way? We're so impatient with people, not because we really want them to be healed, but because we want the credit for saying that we helped them. And I think that that's the issue. We don't want to sit with people. We have to be willing to sit. If it takes me 10 years to heal through an issue, that has to become okay. And I think right now in our space, and I'm saying the church because that's the space that I work in the most, and all churches, I think this is the issue that we can address. We don't want to sit with people for a long period period of time. If someone stays broken for too long, it's like, oh, they're lazy. They're not really about it. Their faith is weak. They don't trust God. They're not really serious about their healing, when really there's something in them that is having a difficult time overcoming this. And we have to also realize that we might plant, but God makes things grow. So we can't, God's not in a rush with people. And we have to stop being in a rush with people.
Literally, Kimme, you better say that, okay? But she's right. Leadership within these spaces, ultimately, like, unfortunately, especially in the church, is this it's pride. We want to see the results. And so the insecurity that we have to deal with as a leader to be able to say, the flock that I'm over, the people that I'm leading look the same as they did 10 years ago. And that makes me look bad. It makes me look like I've done a bad job. And so that makes me insecure. And so it's easier to say, well, that person's not doing X, Y, and Z, and that person's not doing, when in actuality, if we're leading if God has called me to lead, all leading is sitting with someone through what they're getting in the mud with them and being with them. As long as they're in the mud, I'm in the mud with them. But there's this expectation of results and products. And what Kimme said, because it's associated to healing, it's shame inducing. And so we put people in positions that aren't at an expected space to feel like they're doing something wrong. They're not a good Christian. They're not reading their Bible enough. They're not being with the Lord enough. They're doing things. And it's all we're doing is building shame in people. Being able to release these expectations and to just say that, like, I can be with you and I can go on this journey with you, and I don't have an expectation of you to be something different. It's very hard for a leader to not do that results-driven leader.
I want to piggyback off what she just said. Something that I picked up in seminary in talking about this very thing is sometimes we have to be willing to release the I want to help and embrace the I want to be with you. That's it. Because a lot of times when we say I want to help, that's an action word. So I want to do something to get you to the next step, when sometimes a person hasn't even done what they need to do to acknowledge where they are already. And the I want to help you can feel, even to me, if I think about when I'm in my situation and someone says, let me help you, it's like this like anxiety that comes up is like, okay, like what do I do? Like, how do I figure it out? When really I just need someone to say, look, I see you're going through it. Let me just be with you and we can talk through it. Nothing needs to change. Let's just figure it out together and talk about it. Let's just talk.
The next question here is a little bit about sort of these isms, as you explained, Coach, and just some examples in what are contributing factors that you have seen people want to escape from. And to that, it's sort of like, I do this, whether that be a perpetual unhealthy habit. I do this because I am ashamed. I do this because I feel guilty. What are some of those things, Coach, for you that you have seen in supporting families and primarily supporting young people? Why do we see some of those isms exist? Is it heavy shame? Is it heavy abandonment? What are some of the issues that you face?
First, I'd like to say what Rhea said, Sister Rhea said about the mud. And I'm going to answer your question, but I got to come back to the mud because, I started thinking about the mud. And once mud starts to harden, it becomes like sedimentary rock, right? And you can form things. What do we always say about faith? Faith has to be something that is solid, right? Solid as a rock, so to speak. So if you can't go to the rock or you can't sit in the mud, God wants us to be still. And that's what mud does. It slows you down. If you take away the normalcy of being in the mud to be able to find and discover what the true test in your testimony is, then what are we really doing? What are we really saying? To look at from a wide net, when you're talking about young people in the different communities, you cannot forget what history says. You cannot skirt around in this country our historical shame. A lot of times people want to say, well, how did we get all of this trauma and the mental health in this country? It's historical. It started with a lack of humanism. And again, what drove the lack of humanism is capitalism. And we have to be very, very honest with ourselves, because the moment that you supersede and leave that behind and put the blinders on and act like that our country didn't experience the fact that many people in this country were not considered human. So the end result, or the generational result, is what you start to see. And even if you are not a part of that ethnic group that went through that, if you're an ally and you discover humanism, you're affected, and that's vicarious trauma. So again, there you go with those levels and those sheets that are placed upon you that, if not dealt with, create issues in your life. In order to reach our kids, we got to educate them. Education is a necessity. We can't act as though history is the bad guy. History is not the bad guy. The lack of the revelation of humanism is the bad guy. So I always teach families, I teach communities, discover what humanism is. Remove the color by being humanistic. You can't remove the experience, though. So we all have to be educated on dealing with our experiences and our trauma from a historical basis. We have to teach humanity. We have to teach to love each other through humanity, that there is good in all, but we all have to be historically correct. That's it.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the look back. We have so many sayings and so many catchphrases that we can use about, one that we float around our family all the time is that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, whether that be the good or the bad. But primarily, if you're doomed to repeat it, if you don't recognize what didn't work, right? Whether it be generationally, whether it be just a couple years ago, we could take baby steps. But if it didn't work, if it didn't serve you, are we creating patterns that's just going to recreate that? Because that's not going to serve you again. So I appreciate that look back. Rhea and Kimme, from your perspective on supporting women, what do you notice are some of the things that they bring to the table? It's, I emotionally eat because I isolate myself because of this. What do you see as the connection of these behaviors that are unhealthy? What do you see that they're connected to?
I think the most pervasive thing and it's one of the big things for Stretch, is lack of vulnerability, or the idea of vulnerability at all. I think it's that word has been taken into this cultural understanding. So everyone kind of has a different definition of what vulnerability is, and people view it as a weakness, but just acknowledging the truth of where you are and showing up in your skin that day, for us, is vulnerability. And that's the one thing that constantly people really battle with. And so even people that are drawn to a Stretch space, and what that creates is shame, and it creates hiding whatever they're going through. So like you said, if it's the eating, that is sort of the root of all of the issues, even for me personally, but going on a journey of being able to just simply acknowledge where you're at, if it's good, if it's bad, because even sometimes people think vulnerability is sharing all of your business, or saying like all the bad things you've been through. I mean, that's just oversharing sometimes. But vulnerability is, even for me, I struggle with, I can be happy a lot of the time, even in spaces where a lot of other people aren't experiencing joy. And so I felt a level of shame for even expressing the truth of like my joy, for example. So literally being the truth of where you're at in any of these spaces, a lack of vulnerability can be seen in so many different areas. And so for us, because we address women, young women, middle-aged, old women, professional, students, but in all of these different spaces, it's so hard for women to be able to wrap their brain around the concept of showing up in the truth of where they're at in whatever space, whether it be at work, whether it be at church, whether it be with their children, in their marriage. So in all of these spaces, an inability to acknowledge where you're at and living in that reality is what the fight that we fight every day, and everything that we do, that is the fight. Just show up where you're at and don't feel ashamed of where that place is. I think for us is the thing that, no matter what, it's always what we come back to.
You said something that kind of jarred a thought to me. I have a mom who lives with us, and she's elderly. And so just naturally with her and with other family members, we're a little bit more kind of keen to what the senior citizen, the baby boomer, generation hasn't been experiencing. And one thing that I've heard is this sort of wanting to talk about a vulnerability that you still have when you're regarded as someone who's supposed to have figured it out because you've lived a long life. You've had 70 to 80 years to figure this out. And then I've even noticed that some elderly are like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was still there.
Yeah, that has come up during retreats, even because our retreats are geared for women of all ages. We'll have elderly women come on and say like, yeah, I've been wearing a mask my whole life of strength because my kids just think I'm strong and that's who I am. But I realized through this call, this is all like a mechanism to protect this little girl that lives inside of me. And I think that's the one thing that I was going to add on to what Rhea said is one of the things that come up is this, I want to protect myself and I'm afraid. I am afraid to be vulnerable about where I am with XYZ group because I'm afraid. So then I protect myself by withholding. That is literally the narrative that we address 100% of the time. Right. I'm not sharing this with this person because I'm afraid, therefore I will protect myself by doing this. So that's kind of like the wall that we start with breaking down in our retreats. And I think it's something that's very important just as a whole in our society to start there. People are afraid. They are afraid. Being exposed, exposed has like this connotation, like, I don't want to be exposed. But we need to be exposed because a lot of us are lonely, not because we are not surrounded by people, but because loneliness comes from a lack of being known. So if I don't have the ability to expose myself, and if I'm not around people who allow me to expose myself, then I'm going to continue to be unknown and I'm going to continue to live a lonely life. And I think that's something that is important to me and to us. So,
Megan, same question for you. What are some things that you have noticed in working with the people that you service that they want to escape from? And what do they do in response to wanting to have this sort of escapism?
Yeah, we see a lot of overworking right now, actually. So when you're struggling with mental health, and I can only speak to this with my own experience, but it works against your productivity, right? And so you're working on this mental health issue and you're at work and you know you're not being productive. And so what do? You work longer because you still want to get your job done so that you can still turn in the project or meet the deadline or whatever. When in actuality, it would be more beneficial for everyone if you would take the break, take your lunch break, take a vacation day, any little break that you can take, you come back so much more refreshed and so much more productive. So that's one thing. Another thing we're seeing, to Coach's point about education, is people don't understand their own symptoms. They can't put a name to them, right? So they know that something is off, but they don't quite know what. And so to Kimme's point, they are isolated. They feel all alone. They think no one else is experiencing this problem. And so then it becomes a vicious cycle of just overwhelm and overworking and lack of productivity and, comparing yourself to other people.
I want to say my appreciation as women that are on the cutting edge of saying, nah, we're going to make change. We're going to address the trauma, and we're not going to just accept what people say is the norm. So I think that's really important to say, thank you guys. And I'll speak for men, I guess, on this call, that I apologize that through this country and the lens of capitalism, that we have failed our women by creating unnecessary trauma.
Thank you for that, Coach. Thank you for holding it down for the testosterone on the panel. This has been so great. I do not want to forsake our questions. I know we have some questions that have come up during this, even amongst ourselves within the panel. I'm sure we have some questions. So I'm going to toss to Karen. Karen, can you lead us with a bit of a question and answer portion?
Okay, so how it would be a way to address oversharing, because there's potentially a stigma behind that as well, and fear of actually sharing, that you may become an oversharer. And then why basically why is that a thing potentially, like, and how can maybe people overcome that?
Yeah, I think oversharing, I think we have to define what that is. For me, oversharing is just giving information haphazardly just because I can. But I even think there is something to oversharing. When people overshare, there's something that we need to look deeper at. People overshare who have not been heard. People overshare who have not had the opportunity to share anything. And I think if you have the fear of oversharing, I probably would say you're not going to overshare. I think it's important for you to have a space to share. And I think also when I say that, it's important to have spaces where you can overshare. Like Rhea is my best friend. We lead together. We do a lot of things together. And she is someone who I definitely probably overshare with, but it's okay because we have that relationship. Now, would I get on this webinar and tell y'all all my business? Absolutely not. But I can give you context to my experience in my life in a vulnerable way that doesn't make me seem like I'm something that I'm not. So something, Sonia, what you said earlier about like we are expected to not be vulnerable at this point because we've lived for so long, we've gone through certain things. I think we have to get to a place where we stay vulnerable because our experience is what's going to help impact other people, and it's also going to help us continue our progressive healing. So if you overshare, I think it happens and it's going to happen, especially if you haven't been sharing. And I think just becoming okay with that. And for us as the receiver of the oversharing, to be patient with the people who are that we feel are oversharing, because also I think it's a very objective word, subjective word. Like what oversharing is to me might not be oversharing to Rhea. It definitely isn't. So I would leave that there.
Same question for Megan. Do you notice that there have to be, yes, we promote talking about said issues in the workplace, but are there parameters that do need to be set in a home environment, obviously, versus a work environment? How would I be able to identify oversharing at work, if that even is a thing?
That's a great question. We promote regular check-ins, right? So when people aren't heard, then they get frustrated and maybe they overshare, or maybe it spills out in some other undesirable way. And so a couple things that we like to do are to have regular icebreakers. So for your meetings, instead of getting right down to business, check in with people. So one of ours is red, yellow, green light. How are you feeling today? Are you red? Are you yellow, or are you green? And if people want to share more about why they're in the current state that they're in, they are free to do that. If they want to just say, I'm a red today, and pass it to the next person, they're okay to do that as well. And sometimes that will take the whole meeting and the agenda goes out the window because everyone's a red today and we all have stuff we want to share and talk about as a team. And so creating space for that sometimes has to be okay too.
And the connection to what you said, Coach, let's say that capitalism, obviously is a component of this. I don't think we're not seeking to necessarily get away from that. However, if my productivity is directly related to how much this deal is going to close for, or how much we're going to bring in this month, if my productivity is related to that, but my team is all in a red that day, how productive is that day going to be to our end goal, which is to get this product to do its best on the market? So I think that's all related, right? We have to be willing from key leadership, for people in our industry, those who are attendees and those who are listening to the podcast version of this, that's something in our industry, in the events industry, that we have to be willing to say, right? And I'll even get super vulnerable if we will here. I'll even say that I will gauge taking on a client based off of how much of how needy they are. Not saying that the needy client can't get my business or vice versa, but I do have to weigh in the neediness on, am I in that season? right now? Am I in a season to take on what neediness brings from a client? And that's a real thing I have to be willing to say. I will say good, my family has a saying, all money ain't good money. I am willing to forego a check if it means that my mental health is sound. We're at the end of our time. Thank you so much. I know we didn't even get to some of the questions that we had today, but we will allow our attendees or those who are part of our TISO community, we will allow them to get all of your information to be able to maybe even just shoot you over some questions, concerns, or maybe even if they want to solicit your service-based product. Thank you so much. Cara, I'm going to throw to you so you can just do a couple of closing things.
Absolutely. Folks, I would love for you guys to sign up to our newsletter. We have so many good things coming up, and I don't want you to miss it. Today is just an example of that. We do have another webinar next week. So the link is on our link tree if you do want to sign up. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you all again so much. Looking to stay connected, please share these webinars with your communities. We have one more, like Cara said, looking forward, and that is trauma and healing. So ending it with some literal takeaways, some resources to just to support us in our wellness. So again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure meeting you all. You're all amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, guys.
Keep doing what you're doing.
You've been listening to The State of Events, where event professionals connect. For more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. To engage with us on social media, look for @TISO Community. That's @TSOE Community. You can also visit our Facebook page, The State of Events. Make sure you stay connected by joining our newsletter. And lastly, we would love to hear from you. If you have topic suggestions, if you want to be a guest on the show, send us an email to inquiries@thestateofevents.com. That's inquiries@thestateofevents.com.